Larry Elder, thank you so much for joining me. We are filming this one day after your presidential announcement. So I've got to ask, my first question has to be, what is your favorite thing about Iowa as you've come in here?
The people. I mean, they're so down to earth, so relaxed, so unpretentious. My mother grew up on a farm, so I like the whole farming vibe of Iowa. But I just think the people are just so gracious and so warm and relaxed. You don't, I don't get the sense that people are stressed. I don't get the sense that people are hostile the way I feel in other parts of the country. It's just a wonderful, welcoming, warm place.
Awesome. Well, I mean, you have a long campaign ahead of you. And just to get started, you have quite the background here in Iowa with all sorts of people who care about a lot of different issues. What is your pathway to victory here?
Well, getting more votes than everybody else. Um, my pathway to victory is real simple. I don't consider myself to be running against any of the other Republican rivals. I figure I'm running against the Biden-Harris administration and what they've done to this country in the last 2.5 years. I frankly did not think you could take a mallet to this country the way they did in the last 2.5 years and reverse so many things that were going well. We had the most secure borders ever, and now we have over 5 million illegal aliens entering the country. We don't know who they are. We don't know where they are. Some numbers have been intercepted who are on the terror watch list. How many of those who are on the watch list who've gotten through, we have no idea. We were energy independent, and now we're energy dependent. All across our country, cities like Chicago, LA, New York, crime is up dramatically because of these soft on crime DAs that have been handpicked by people like George Soros, because of the anti-cop rhetoric, because of the way the police are becoming demoralized. So that you find departments like New York, Chicago, LA, where hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of officers have either retired or quit, and there are manpower shortages. Bad guys are not being held accountable. I'm in California where they passed Proposition 47 that allows you to steal up to $950, not just a day, but per store. And if you get caught, they write you a ticket because you committed a misdemeanor. And because of cashless bail, you have zero prospect of ever going to jail. And there's another proposition called Proposition 56 that got passed that reduced, Sarah, a whole bunch of categories of crime to non-violent offenses. I kid you not. Assault on a police officer is a non-violent offense. Serial arson is a non-violent offense. Rape of an intoxicated victim is now a non-violent offense. So what we've done, we've reduced the chances of a bad guy being caught, being convicted, and being incarcerated. When you do that, crime goes up. They may be criminals, but they're not stupid. The way this country shut down so many states because of COVID, against science. There's something called the Great Barrington Declaration. It was suppressed because of the way Twitter worked with the government to suppress anybody dissenting on whether or not there should be lockdowns. And so there wasn't a healthy debate over whether or not we should have a lockdown. There wasn't a healthy debate over whether we should have mask or vaccine mandates. As a result, we used draconian methods, especially in California, that shut down businesses, shut down schools, shut down churches. So these are the kinds of things that have happened in the last 2.5 years under this administration. They need to be reversed.
You've said you're not considering yourself running against any other candidates. However, the voters will be comparing you to Trump, to Nikki Haley. What makes you stand out in comparison to them?
I think the voters want somebody who they feel can win against the Biden-Harris administration. That's what they're going to be looking for. And it's not just policy, it's personality, it's relatability, it's likability. And I'll leave it up to the voters. I think the most important thing is whoever it is, whoever the nominee is, he or she, we must get behind him or her to make sure we will have 4 more years of this administration. So that's the main thing. I think voters are looking for somebody who can win. All the candidates bring something to the table. Donald Trump has a record he can run on, obviously. Ron DeSantis, if he gets in, has a record he can run on. But I've been talking about issues for 40 years, writing about issues for 40 years, debating these issues for 40 years, whether it's about guns, whether it's about foreign policy, whether it's about immigration, whether it's about economy, what causes inflation. So I have a record as well. I've written 1,200 columns. I have probably 30 or 40,000 hours of radio. I ran for governor of California, the 4th largest country in the world if it were a separate state. And I got 3.5 million votes. More than almost all the other 45 rivals on the replacement side combined. California has 58 counties. I carried 57 of them. The only one I lost was San Francisco, and lost that by less than 200 votes. In 8 weeks, because I got in with 8 weeks left, We raised $27 million, more than all the people on the replacement side combined, from 150,000 individual donors. And Sarah, half of them came from outside of California. Now, why would somebody who doesn't live in California, never lived in California, not planning on moving to California, donate to a California governor? Because they know that California policies infect everything, whether it's the policy that affects people out here in Iowa that requires pig farmers to put the pigs in a certain area, and left-wing policies that California has enacted affects everything. So a lot of people outside the country wanted to help to make sure that California, try to prevent some of the ridiculous policies that California has from affecting the rest of the country. So I finished the campaign. I go to Key West, Florida. Never been there before. I've always considered myself to be first and foremost a writer. And Key West is where Hemingway wrote most of his books. I walk into a restaurant. Hey, Larry, I contributed to you. I wish you had won. Why don't you run for president? Hey, Larry, I threw something in your tip jar, as you often say. Why don't you run for president? And so many people recommended that I run for president. I hadn't even thought about it until I went to Key West. My point is, these are people that have been watching and believe that I have an opportunity to not only get the nomination, but to win.
You name dropped Ron DeSantis there for a second. And I want to get to the overturning of Roe v. Wade, because since then we've seen a lot of policies come forward about banning abortions at different points, talking about the use of abortion medication. In a state like Florida, which you just mentioned, Key West, a state like Florida, you have the 6-week bill that Ron DeSantis just signed in. Right. So, I mean, where do you stand on the issue? Where is the line that needs to be drawn?
You know, before Roe v. Wade, these issues were debated state by state. The entirety of our country's history, abortion was a state issue. What happened in 1973 when the Supreme Court took up this case, and they shouldn't have, is they federalized the whole issue. It's now back to the states where it ought to belong. I think every state should decide this. And at some point, I believe that those who are pro-abortion, who believe that people like myself who are pro-life, are anti-women, are going to settle down and calm down and recognize that every individual state will have to decide this issue. I'm in California, and after Roe was overturned, there was something called Proposition 1 to enshrine the, quote, right to an abortion in state law. Well, there's already a right to privacy in the California Constitution, so it was completely redundant, but it was just done in order to make it a campaign issue. I voted in favor of parental notification. I was outvoted. I voted in favor of advising a parent before a teenager got an abortion. I was outvoted. Every state will have to decide this issue. Florida made their decision, Texas made their decision, and other states will make their decision. It is a state right issue, and that's where it's been for the entirety of our history except for the last 60 years. And it was a mistake for the Supreme Court to ever have taken up that case.
Now, let's rewind back to 2000. When you wrote your book, The 10 Things You Can't Say in America.
A New York Times best-selling book.
And we are now in 2023. Do you feel like the ideologies you put in those books, such as passing a national sales tax, reducing government by 80%, things like that, do you think they still stand up today, and do you still stand behind those?
I do. And what I know and see from the 20 years or so that I wrote the book is both parties spend. Government gets bigger and bigger. I think it's only been one time in our nation's history where government actually has gotten smaller and taxes have gotten lower when a president has come in to when the president left. And that was during Calvert Coolidge. Ronald Reagan ran in 1980, and he promised to get rid of, for example, the Department of Education. When he left 8 years later, it was still there, bigger than before. We need an amendment to the Constitution to limit spending to a certain percentage of the GDP, with exceptions for war and for natural disaster. That's the only way you're going to restrain spending, because even Barack Obama and Bill Clinton said that the major so-called entitlements, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, were unsustainable. Republicans have been saying it for a long time. My point is, these are even Democrats saying it, yet nothing is done. Why? Because it's a third rail in politics. If you tell a voter you're going to take something away, the other side will say you're trying to kill Social Security, you're trying to sunset Medicare. The only way we're going to ever resolve the spending problem, which is causing the inflation and causing sluggish growth in GDP, is to restrain spending and to make sure that both parties will say, well, my hands were tied. I had to abide by the law, and the law is in the Constitution, and I had to therefore modify my spending in order to fit the law. Otherwise, all we do is kick the can down the road and keep spending and keep spending and keep spending, and it hurts the younger people.
Now, you've made selective comments about women in politics, women in leadership, and I'm curious, would you consider a woman VP?
I would consider the most qualified person who's compatible with me, and whoever that is, he or she. I don't believe there ought to be a litmus test. I don't believe, for example, that Joe Biden should have said the next vacancy is going to be a black female. I think he should have said the next vacancy is going to be the most qualified person consistent with my philosophy. So I don't believe in color coordinating. I believe in choosing the best possible person.
Now, I'm curious, do you think you have a unique ability to reach Black voters this next election?
I do. I think I have a unique ability to reach all sorts of voters, but I grew up in the hood. The high school I went to was the high school that was featured in the movie Boys in the Hood, which you didn't see because you're too young. But it centered around Crenshaw High School, which is my high school. And I've seen the damage that's done by the large number of kids who enter the world without a father in the home married to the mother. I know the stats. I know that a young black male between the ages of 10 to 34 is 13 times more likely to be murdered than a young white male, same demographic. A lot of black people are unaware of this. So I'm going to talk about the truth, talk about the facts, talk about the fact that it is a lie that the police are engaging in systemic racism. And that lie not only is wrong, not only is it demoralizing police officers, not only is it causing people not to want to join the police, it's also causing people to get killed. How? It's called the Ferguson effect or the George Floyd effect. Cops are pulling back because they're afraid of being called systemically racist. They're afraid of somebody holding up a cell phone, filming something out of context, and the cop may lose his job, may lose his pension, may even go to jail. So cops are pulling back. As a result, in cities all over the country, there are hundreds, if not thousands, more people who are now dead, who would not have been dead had the police been doing their normal proactive policing. So the people who are most harmed by the lie of systemic racism are the very black and brown people that people on the left claim that they care about. Also schools. I said a moment ago, 85% of black 8th graders, these are kids who are 13 years old, can neither read nor do math at grade level. We're spending more money than ever and getting less results. And the money needs to follow the child rather than the other way around, and that's school choice. And where I've seen studies having to do with school choice, the math scores are better, reading scores are better, graduation rates are better, and parental satisfaction through the roof. We need to divorce the Democratic Party from the Teachers Union. They're the largest funder of the Democratic Party, and they are adamantly against school choice. There was a study a few years ago done by Fordham Institute that looked at where government school teachers, that's a term I prefer rather than public school, government school teachers send their own kids. Nationwide, around 10% of families put their kids in private school. Around 6% of black families do. 49%, I kid you not, of Philadelphia government school teachers with school-age kids put their own kids in private schools. The number is 39% in Chicago. The people who know the schools the best aren't putting their own kids in it. What does that tell you? It is the equivalent of opening up a restaurant, putting up a sign saying, come on in, eat the food, we won't. So, school choice, the epidemic of fatherlessness, the lie that the police are engaging in systemic racism, are hurting black people more than anybody else. Finally, porous borders. I have a friend who's on the Civil Rights Commission. His name is Peter Kirsanow. And he said, we've done many studies on the impact of illegal immigration on the economy. And the liberals in the commission, the centrists, and the conservatives all agree that the group most hurt by illegal immigration are black and brown people living in the inner city, because almost all the illegal aliens have high school or less education, and therefore they're competing against people with similar education in the inner city. And they put downward pressure to the tune of around $1,800 per year on their wages. And the studies have shown that about 1 million more blacks would have jobs if the borders had been secured. So these are the kinds of issues I'm going to talk about. And I think that I can get a lot of people who have not thought about those issues to begin thinking those issues.
And you talked about more central people on the political spectrum. How do you plan on hitting those voters? I mean, it feels like that's kind of the need from the GOP right now, is somebody who can really get those more moderate voters.
It's tough. I mean, if I could if I had a magical formula, I'd be in Sacramento right now. You'd be talking to me from the governor's mansion. Look, I saw a poll that showed 66% or so of Democrats believe that all Republicans are racist, sexist, and bigoted. Over 80% believe that Donald Trump is a racist. This is just almost demented, almost pathological. They've been indoctrinated. My mother was a lifelong Democrat. My dad was a lifelong Republican. And I'd watch them at the dinner table, and they would have vigorous arguments, but nobody called anybody a Nazi or a fascist. Nobody said you only care about the rich, you don't care about the poor. Nobody said that. They debated issues civilly and with respect. And we need to be able to do that. And I know that I can do that. I'll give you one other example if I can. When my race was over, I went to a restaurant on the west side of LA. LA is all liberal. West side is even more liberal than the rest of the city. And I'm in a restaurant waiting for a friend of mine. He's late. So I'm sitting there for about 15 minutes by myself. The table of two ladies next to me, I think they felt sorry for me. So they started talking to me. And it turned out they were 85 years old. They'd known each other since the second grade. One of them was celebrating her birthday. They were both Jewish, that came up. And one was a human rights activist, she said. The other one said she was a psychotherapist. And then about 8 or 10 minutes into the conversation, she said, I know you. You're that guy that ran for governor. You're that Larry Elder. And she smiled and she said, guess who we voted for? I said, you didn't vote for me. She said, how do you know that? I said, well, let's see. We're in the west side of LA. You're both Jewish. One of you is a human rights activist. It doesn't take Columbo to put that together. You didn't vote for me. And she said, that's right, we didn't. I said, well, let me ask you something. How do you feel about the crime? And they both said it's outrageous. They even knew people that had been attacked. I said, would you ever put your kid in a government school? They both admitted they would never do it in a million years. How do you feel about the way Gavin Newsom shut down the state in a more severe way than any of the other 49 states? And they both said it was outrageous. They both knew people who had lost their businesses. About a third of all restaurants in California are now gone forever because Gavin Newsom shut down this thing. I said, how do you feel about the fact that people are leaving California for the first time in 170 years? They both said that they had lost friends because friends left because they couldn't buy a house. I said, so here we are completing each other's sentences, yet you didn't vote for me. And I said, have you ever had a conversation with a conservative Republican before? And they admitted they never had in their life. Well, they're going to have a conversation with me. And if you are a rational person, if you have any degree of fairness, you're going to have to begin to rethink some of your assumptions. I think I can do that.
Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yes, of
okay.
course.